quickly. Settle down.
2, 1.
Lasers on.
Bomb's gone. Bomb's gone.
Looking good.
10 seconds.
Shell 4-1, I've got to tell you,
5,
I think that's wedged to the south.
4, 3, 2,
My position
1.
for about 10
Get
miles.
the impact.
Boom! Oh, yes! We destroyed that thing bigger than Dallas.
On November 11, 1918, after 4 years of costly and fruitless war, Imperial Germany had little choice but accept an armistice. The Allies were determined to prevent a German resurgence. The armistice was harsh. That included German air power. According to Clause 4, Germany was to surrender in good condition 1,700 fighting and bombing aeroplanes, including all Fokker D-7 fighters and the entire night bombing fleet. By the 12th of December 1918, the new Republican government in Berlin announced that it had complied, but according to Allied records, only 516 land planes and 58 seaplanes had been surrendered. It was a pattern of duplicity that was soon to become the norm for nearly 15 years. Despite the official disbandment of the Luftstreitkräfte in January 1919, the German forces still had over 9,000 aircraft in their inventories and had no intention of sacrificing air assets. The situation changed on June 28, 1919, when the German delegation at the peace talks in Paris was presented with terms of the Versailles Treaty and forced to sign. The victorious Allies were now much more insistent, prohibiting all military aircraft manufacture in Germany and giving the fledgling government 3 months in which to hand over all Air Force equipment. As a result, the air industry in Germany virtually ceased to exist. But the Germans did not give up. By 1924, General Hans von Seeckt, Chief of the Army General Staff, had ensured that a rump of air officers was retained in the Reichswehr. In addition, official support was given to the new sport of gliding, with many future Luftwaffe aces getting their first experience of flight through the government-backed Deutschen Luftfahrers. Of even more significance was the development of military links with Russia. Both Germany and Russia were worried about the Poles, and both were pariah states which were forced together in response to widespread hatred and distrust. On April 16th, Berlin and Moscow created a framework for a secret air and military alliance based on a Russian need for German technology and a German need for training facilities beyond the gaze of the Allies. There, for 11 years, the Old Eagles, wartime officers, and Young Eagles, new recruits, trained to be the spearhead of the new Luftwaffe. As wounds healed from the Great War, the victorious Allies had begun to lift some of the restrictions imposed by Versailles. This was most apparent in terms of civil aviation. On January 6, 1926, Lufthansa, the German national airlines, emerged under the directorship of Erhard Milch. Many Lufthansa pilots would later join the Luftwaffe, while the existence of commercial aviation allowed Milch to place orders with German aircraft manufacturers for more modern airplanes, including what would become the workhorse of the Luftwaffe, the trimotor Junkers Ju-52. Plans for the recreation of a military air force, a Luftwaffe, were already well advanced by the late 1920s. The economic crisis of 1929 to 1930 put on hold many of the initial ideas, but the basic plan remained. The plans received official approval on August 10, 1932, 5 months before Adolf Hitler was appointed Reich Chancellor. Hitler therefore inherited an embryonic air force, but the new Nazi government gave the Luftwaffe a much-needed financial boost. Within hours of becoming chancellor, the Nazi leader appointed World War I ace and right-hand man Hermann Goering. However, much of the work on creating the Luftwaffe fell to Milch, who had come over from Lufthansa in 1933. One of Milch's first acts was to order fighter and bomber aircraft to be produced to boost the ailing aircraft industry. These early designs were only interim fixes. They included the Heinkel HE-51 biplane fighter and the Ju-52 bomber conversion, but other brand-new designs were soon on the way. It is ironic to think that the Messerschmitt Bf-109, World War II's best-known fighter, was almost discarded out of hand. First flown in September 1935, the Bf-109 scored more aircraft kills in World War II than any other Axis aircraft, and at various times served as an air superiority fighter, an escort fighter, an interceptor, a ground attack aircraft, and a reconnaissance aircraft. The Bf-109 was also produced in greater quantities than any other Axis aircraft of the war, and is the most produced fighter aircraft in history, with over 31,000 units built. Although the Bf-109 had some weaknesses, including a short range and a troublesome landing gear, it stayed competitive with Allied fighter aircraft until the end of the war. The 109 took its first flight tests in September 1935. In March 1936, the RLM received news that the Spitfire had been ordered into production, and a form of mass panic broke out. 12 days later, the Bf-109B1 was ordered into production, setting the stage for the greatest air confrontation of all time. On September 1st, 1939, at 04:26 hours, 3 Ju-87Bs took off for the very first bombing attack of World War II. Their targets were the approaches to 2 railway bridges at Dirschau. They had to be blocked to prevent the destruction of the bridges. It was a partial success because the Poles managed to blow up one bridge. That first day of the war was not an overall success for the Luftwaffe and the Ju-87. Most of the strength of the Luftwaffe was sent far behind the lines to destroy the Polish Air Force on the ground, but without conclusive results. But during the next few days, the cooperation between the ground forces and the Stukas improved. Every time the Polish army tried to organize resistance to the rapid advance of the tanks, Stukas were called in to destroy it. In the largest Polish counterattack of the war, a force of 170,000 men attacked the rear of the 10th Army in the Battle of the Bzura. This was brought to a halt by relentless air attacks from the Stukas. The broken Polish army was surrounded at Kutno and completely destroyed. After the fighting in Poland, Joseph Goebbels ordered the Ministry of Propaganda to make a movie about the power of the Ju-87 and the devastation it had caused. It ended with a threat against England if it did not seek peace. As far as England and the Ju-87 were concerned, it was a hollow threat. There was little reason for the Stukas and the Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters to intervene in the land battles during the fight in the Scandinavian countries during the spring of 1940. Instead, the Ju-87 was used extensively for attacks against Allied ships, which tried to supply their own expeditionary force in Norway and to prevent the Germans from reinforcing theirs. The attacks of the Stukas concentrated mainly on the Allied attempt to recapture Narvik and Trondheim by landings in Harstad, Namsan, and Andelsnes. At Narvik, the Luftwaffe sank a cruiser and damaged 2 others, as well as the battleship Resolution. For the Royal Navy, this was a serious lesson about operating under enemy air superiority. It was a lesson that would soon have to be retaught in the English Channel. Poland and the Scandinavian countries were not much of an opponent for Germany. It was in May 1940, during the invasion of the Low Countries and France, that the Luftwaffe really proved its effectiveness. In the opening days of the Battle of France, the Stukas became legendary. There it was not only its accuracy as a dive bomber, but also the fear that it spread among combatants and civilians alike that was decisive. Of course, it did not help that the French army had 2 commanders and 3 headquarters, none of which actually knew what was going on at the front. Nor did it improve things that French generals had been too complacent to properly train their soldiers. The French had expected that after any serious move made by the Germans, they would have days or weeks to react, while reinforcements and artillery were laboriously moved to the front line. Their old-fashioned army, based on the tactical principles of World War I, was completely unable to defend itself against this kind of attack. The fatal breakthrough came on May 13th near Sedan, after a concentrated attack by the Ju-87s wreaked havoc among the French defenders. Small groups of Stukas methodically attacked the villages in front line, road crossings, and artillery positions. Even the Germans, moving forward under protection of these attacks, were frightened. French General Hunsinger refused to call in fighters to chase the attackers away, fearing the attrition that such operations would cause. The prevailing view was that the Air Force was a vulnerable weapon that would soon be lost if it were used. General Gamelin was alleged to have predicted that it will burn itself in a flash. When the French commanders saw their mistake, they began to ask for British fighter aircraft to protect their troops. They were unaware that because of monumental incompetence, most of the French Air Force had remained inactive. 3/4 of the French fighters were never committed to the battle, leaving the Luftwaffe free to attack anything that moved. The Luftwaffe may have had a free hand during the race across France, but it was unable to perform the coup de grace on its surround foe of the French Channel coast. The Luftwaffe's attack on Dunkirk showed the limitations of both the Luftwaffe and the Ju-87. There, the French and British soldiers, finally accustomed to the screaming attacks of the dive bombers, resisted admirably, defending the city until almost all the British and many of the French soldiers could be evacuated overseas. At the same time, the operations of the RAF to protect the evacuation caused heavy losses for the attackers, although a large number of ships were sunk or damaged. It was the first sign of the vulnerability of the Ju-87 and the Luftwaffe. When France fell, Hitler had hoped that Churchill would see the hopelessness of continuing the war, but the British War Cabinet rejection of German terms was emphatic. Recognizing this, and in an effort to finish the war in the West, Hitler ordered the rapid preparation of an invasion plan against Britain. The first step to invasion was control of the air. On July 10th, the battle began with the Canal Kampf. The Channel War comprised a series of running fights above convoys of freighter vessels speeding through the English Channel. These battles off the coast tended to favor the Germans, whose bomber escorts massively outnumbered the convoy patrols. The number of ship sinkings became so great that the British Admiralty canceled all further convoys through the Channel. However, these early fights provided both sides with experience. By the end of this period, the RAF was winning, at least in terms of pure numbers. The Luftwaffe had lost 248 fighters and bombers to the RAF's 148 fighters lost. While these numbers were encouraging to the RAF, it became clear that sustaining such a battle of attrition was impossible. This was not so much because of the loss of fighter craft, as the British fighter production was doing a relatively good job in maintaining fighter numbers. More importantly, the loss in qualified pilots was slowly crippling the RAF. The situation was looking grim, and the real onslaught had yet to materialize. On August 1st, Führer Directive No. 17 was issued from Hitler's headquarters. It read in part, "The Luftwaffe is to overpower the Royal Air Force in the shortest possible time. The intensification of the air war may begin on or after 5 August. The Nazi war machine was again gearing up for battle. The German strategy was influenced by pre-war theories of strategic bombing that stressed the weakness of air defense and the effects of terror bombing on public morale. After the Spanish Civil War, the emphasis of German air operations had shifted toward a more tactical force. In Poland and France, the Luftwaffe had operated jointly with the Wehrmacht in its Blitzkrieg or Lightning War. In the Battle of Britain, however, the Luftwaffe had to operate alone, not as support for an advancing army, but as a decisive weapon in its own right. The Luftwaffe was facing an opponent the likes of which it had not met before, a sizable, highly coordinated, well-supplied air force fielding aircraft every bit the match for the German Bf-109 and the twin-engine Bf-110. The majority of the RAF's fighting would rest upon the workhorse Hurricane Mk-1, but more shocking to the German pilots was the newer Spitfire Mk-1, which was quickly recognized as a nimble, world-class fighter. Initial Luftwaffe estimates allotted 4 days to defeat the RAF's fighter command in southern England, followed by 4 weeks for the bombers and long-range fighters to mop up the rest of the country and destroy the UK's aircraft industry. The plan developed by Luftwaffe Command called for a concerted strike against British radar installations. This was to be followed by the actual Aldertag mission the next day against RAF Fighter Command bases. August 10th was set as Eagle Day. The weather, which was to prove an important feature of the campaign, delayed Aldertag, or Eagle Day, until August 13th. But on the 12th, the first attempt was made to blind the doubting air defense system when aircraft from the Specialist Fighter Bomber Unit Erprobungsgruppe 210 attacked 4 radar stations. Even though the Germans lost more aircraft than the RAF, they did succeed in downing a significant portion of the RDS. Eagle Day itself saw concerted strikes against airfields all over southern England. These strikes were deemed a great success by the Luftwaffe, who announced they had destroyed 84 fighters and 8 air bases. In truth, it was a failure. The British were able to get all but one of their RDS stations back up, which allowed some warning of the oncoming onslaught and allowed them to shoot down 46 German aircraft, with the loss of only 13 of their own. As the week after Alder Tag drew on, the airfield attacks moved further inland, and repeated raids were made on the radar chain. August 15th was the greatest day, when the Luftwaffe mounted the largest number of sorties of the campaign. It was also the day of the one attack by Luftflotte 5 in the entire Battle of Britain. Believing the strength of fighter command to be concentrated away in the south, raiding forces from Denmark and Norway swept in for a series of raids on targets in the north. The raids were a disaster. The bombers ran into strong resistance from RAF fighters. Inadequately escorted by long-range Me-110 Zerstores, the bombers were cut to pieces. As a result, Luftflotte 5 would not appear in strength again over England. The 18th of August was the bloodiest day of the air battle. The losses were so great that both sides dubbed it the hardest day. Following the grinding battles of the 18th, exhaustion and the weather reduced operations for most of a week, allowing the Luftwaffe to review their performance. The hardest day had sounded the end for the Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber in the campaign. On August 18th, the so-called Stuka slaughter of Thorney Island, when a large formation was caught without fighter cover, cost the Luftwaffe 30 Stukas, shot down, crash-landed, or damaged beyond repair. This veteran of the Blitzkrieg was simply too vulnerable to fighter attack over Britain, and to preserve the Stuka force, Goering withdrew it from the fighting. This removed the Luftwaffe's main precision bombing weapon and shifted the burden of pinpoint attacks on the already stretched Me-110 fighter bombers of Erprobungsgruppe 210. As a long-range escort fighter, the Bf-110C received a disastrous mauling at the hands of the more nimble Hurricane and Spitfire. Rather than protecting the bombers under escort, the Bf-110C formations usually found that they were hard put to defend themselves, and the farcical situation developed in which single-seat Bf-109E fighters had to afford protection to the escort fighters. The Me-110 Zerstore had proven itself too fragile for dogfighting with single-engine fighters, and its participation as an escort fighter was scaled back. But with the withdrawal of the Stukas, the Me-110 found new life as a dive bomber, and in the years to come, it would serve Germany well as a heavy night fighter. Goering made yet another fateful decision, to order more bomber escorts at the expense of free hunting sweeps. To achieve this, the weight of the attack now fell on Luftflotte 2, and most of the Me-109 forces in Luftflotte 3 were transferred to Kesselring's command, reinforcing the fighter bases in the Pas-de-Calais. Stripped of its fighters, Luftflotte 3 would concentrate on the night bombing campaign. Finally, Goering ordered the attacks on the radar chain stopped. The attacks were seen as unsuccessful, and neither the technically inept. Neither Reichsmarschall nor his subordinates realized how vital the chain home stations were to the defense. From August 24th onwards, the Luftwaffe concentrated all their strength on knocking out fighter command. Of the 33 heavy attacks in the next 2 weeks, 24 were against airfields. These were desperate times for the RAF, which was also taking many casualties in the air. Aircraft production could replace aircraft, but replacement pilots were barely keeping pace with losses, and novice flyers were being shot down in droves. For Luftwaffe air crews, a bailout over England meant capture, while parachuting into the English Channel often meant drowning or death from exposure. Morale began to suffer, and Kanalkranke, or channel sickness, a form of combat fatigue, began to appear amongst the German pilots. Their replacement problem was even worse than the British, and yet the Luftwaffe was winning this battle of the airfields. Another fortnight of this pounding, and the RAF might have been forced to withdraw their squadrons from the south of England. But fate and Hitler's ego was about to step in to save the British. In the very early morning hours of August 25th, a lone HE-111, who had veered off course, accidentally bombed central London against Hitler's standing orders not to do so. Little did this lost pilot know his actions would alter the course of the battle, and maybe even the war itself. Outraged by such an attack on a completely civilian target, Churchill ordered a retaliatory strike on Berlin for that night. Goering himself had boasted that such a raid would never happen. He had once stated jokingly that, "You can call me Meyer if it ever occurs." Much to the amazement of stunned Berliners, on the night of August 25th, 81 British Hampton bombers appeared over Berlin and delivered a blow to the heart of the Nazi regime. It was ineffective as a military strike, but people were indeed calling Goering Meyer, a deep insult to the anti-Semitic leader. Goering promised it would never happen again, but additional strikes did repeatedly come. These missions were also useless in terms of military value, but they hit the Nazis in probably their most vulnerable spot: Hitler's ego. He could not allow such an intrusion into the fatherland to go unanswered. Hitler immediately gave a radio address in which he stated, "If the British bomb our cities, we will bury theirs," and against the advice of his generals, issued orders to Goering to institute a merciless bombing campaign against London. The September 7th raid targeted docks in the east end of the city, and over the coming days, massive raids were launched again and again, some targeting the docks, but others were bombing indiscriminately. The RAF came up, but in greater numbers than the Luftwaffe expected. Over the coming days, the attacks on London continued. The break from bombing the airfields gave the RAF critical breathing space. It was the turning point. The Battle of Britain culminated on September 15, 1940, with two massive waves of German attacks that were decisively repulsed by the RAF. The total casualties on this critical day was 60 German aircraft shot down versus only 26 for the RAF, or a ratio of roughly 2-to-1 in favor of the RAF. The German defeat caused Hitler to order Operation Sea Lion indefinitely postponed. Night bombing raids known as the Blitz would continue, but the Battle of Britain was over. Thanks to one lone bomber, a successful impossible mission, and Hitler's ego, the last bastion of freedom in Europe had been saved.